Right. So welcome to week 3 of our podcast. This week we have another special guest with us. This is Ben Smith. Ben's an agent who I've worked with for many years now. Do you want to say hi, Ben?
Hey guys.
Yeah. So Ben's been a field agent. He's now converted over to telesales during the pandemic. So we're going to ask Ben some questions, and he's hopefully going to provide some tips and useful information for those of you who are agents who might want to become agents in the future. So Ben, can you tell us a little bit how you got started in the business?
So I got started in the business about almost 4 years ago. I was in college. It was just, an opportunity that Joe presented to me, and it seemed like, better than anything I was doing at the time, 18-year-old working, jobs. I was working at a deli place before that. And, I got my license during the spring semester of my freshman year. And just kind of kept working at it. Obviously, you're, 18-year-old kid going out in the field for your first time. You can get, a little anxious about the whole process, because first time doing field sales, first time working off your own head, it can be scary to think about that. But, if you keep working, and I've seen it with everybody else, if you just stay, trust the process laid out for you, and you're in a good system, you will get to the point where, it is just like, I don't want to say a turnkey, but it's kind of like clockwork. You know exactly what to do in the business. You can handle yourself pretty well. And then in turn of that, comes obviously, getting a decent, pay, basically, which, it's what happened to me. I was working part-time for about like a year and a half, I'd say, just doing that in school. And that was kind of like my buffer area where I could work, 15 hours a week, just kind of learn it to where, I can, 100% handle myself on my own.
Well, that's something that I think a lot of people, my first year I was working at Staples part-time because that's what paid the bills at the time. Well, what I had to pay while I worked. I think a lot of people, one thing I want to mention is that I think I think this is just true. A lot of IMOs, a lot of people online, everything is like this rosy picture. Everyone's making all this money. Everyone's posting all their sales. But a lot of people, and I think this was me and Ben, the first place we were at, we experienced this, is a lot of it is just a facade for a lot of people. They're not going to tell you the truth. They're trying to recruit you. They're just trying to tell you this inflated. I mean, I'm not going to say anything in particular, but you can go on people's websites. They're going to post numbers of what they're making. That's nowhere near accurate. Everything is just very rosy. And I like to look at things realistically. And I think that's one of the reasons why I've been successful is I don't fall victim to this, I don't want to call it this toxic positivity, but it kind of is. Because I don't think it benefits anyone. So Ben, was that something that you were surprised with when you got into it? That
I was definitely surprised. And, you can imagine, again, people, you're my age, if we have someone who's twice our age telling us you can do this, you can do that, you can get kind of, they call it drunk off the Kool-Aid, when they're saying, here's my numbers, I wrote, $300,000 in business, and they're not telling you directly that they made it, or they are. In some cases they are, but, it kind of cracked for me, when there were people saying, you can write 200,000-300,000 business, you can make deep six figures doing this. And, I just looked and there was no evidence that they were actually, clearing that, $300,000 a year. And that's when it was kind of surprising for me. And then it got better as we moved through IMOs, but still, I think every IMO out there is guilty of this. There's no one that's going to be 100% straight up with you in terms of like a company in a whole, just because, they're businessmen. They are trying to recruit. It is a 1099 situation where the more they recruit, the more they make money. State Farm's the same exact way. Big companies like that, it's not just, regulated to, these IMOs of a couple hundred people. But,
so do you think that easy money common misconception is why it's so difficult for people to stay in the business?
Well, look exactly. Look at like how do MLMs attract so many people? Not saying that the insurance business is like this, but you look at how do MLMs survive? Herbalife is a publicly traded stock after all these years, these documentaries, everything. I think it's that people, at the end of the day, they want to believe, the rose-colored picture. But the reality is, my first year in the business, I think I made, even after I stopped being part-time, I made like $30,000. Like, it's not awful money, but it wasn't nearly. I mean, I think that's the reality for most of us, is that your first year, if you're lucky, you probably make between 40 to 60, and then it kind of improves from there. But no one's going to tell you that. They're going to tell you that, your ceiling, it's the same thing like you see on LinkedIn all the time, is people say, oh, you can come with me, you'll make 140, 150% commission. And then you find that that's like a singular expensive term product. Everything else, you're at like a 90.
But isn't that obvious in the beginning? Like, at what point do you realize that it's not going to be as easy as you think it's going to be? Like, it just seems like people lose their steam way early on. So at what point, Ben, did you know that it was
it's me and Ben in the same situation, weren't we, Ben? Because everyone was saying the same thing. So they make you.
Yeah, everyone was. It first crept into my mind because, again, I was young. I was kind of drunk off that Kool-Aid. And I just stepped back and asked myself a question, like, if he's telling this to like an 18-year-old with no job history, why isn't everybody doing this? Why isn't everybody an insurance agent making, over $100,000 a year? That's when I first kind of thought, and I didn't really, pay much attention to it, but it was always in the back of my mind. Like, why isn't everybody doing this if it's this easy,
And the fact is, it's really not. I mean, this is nothing to take. I think the opportunity in this business is greater than pretty much anywhere else you can go, especially with no education or background. But the reality is, there's, just like anything else, there's tremendous difficulties. There's, if you're in the field, it's appointment setting, going into homes. Some people just don't have the capacity to do that, if it's physical or otherwise, or chargebacks and learning these products. And like, there's a lot to it. And I think that's one of the things that if any new agent is watching this, it's probably the number one thing I would say, is look at it realistically. Don't look at all the fine print. That's something that I think me and Ben were not necessarily guilty of, but we kind of fell victim to, is don't just believe what you're told. You have to look into things yourself, draw your own conclusions. But beyond that, Ben, when you really started selling, what are some of the tips that you can give to people in the field when you were in the field before the pandemic that would be helpful for final experience?
What I would say is, in most cases, well, what I want to say first is don't stop working. If you go out your first 3 days or your first week and write one policy, just cover the lead cost, it's very easy to get discouraged. That's the last thing to do, is try to get discouraged. And, I can't really say that because I felt victim to that, too. Everybody does it. Even now, if I don't sell like a policy in like a day or a day and a half, I do get discouraged. I think no one can be 100% immune to that, but it's just try to limit that. And, I would say, if you do have a good, training system in place, you do have a good upline, always ask them for questions. It was very important to me to go out and see somebody, writing. Like, the first time I went out with Josh is when, I actually started to get into final expense and write a decent amount. We went out in Wilmington, Delaware, and I saw him with my own eyes write 9 policies in a day. And I just thought, like, that was when, it kind of reversed the situation too. It is this easy for some people because they put the time in, they put the effort in, and, they just want to, be great in this business. They want to make the most money. And it is a driving factor for some people. And I think it is very healthy, because if you're doing that, you develop a really good work ethic. I think work ethic is the number one thing you need to be, kind of hammering on yourself. I
think that's the problem in what we were discussing before, is that, that's absolutely true. But I think the issue comes where, people are under the impression, well, I can just do this, it'll be easy, I'll make all this money, where the reality is you have to work really hard at it. It's a business, you have to invest and spend money into it. I think that's where the disconnect is for a lot of people, because you always hear the stat, 9 out of every 10 new agents fail. And I think that's probably the biggest reason, is you're not creating, I mean, you can't fault the agent for everything, but it's the expectation created probably isn't the correct one, where it's not like you can't work 1 day a week and make it work. You have to have time to put in, you have to have some money to put in most cases, unless you're on some kind of free lead program. But the time investment is what I think a lot of people just aren't ready for, because it's a business
Exactly.
else, and it's difficult like anything else. So beyond that, when you converted over to the telesales model, what were some of the surprises that you found for people who might be thinking about selling over the phone with final expense?
I'd say the biggest surprise, and I kind of wondered it going in, so it wasn't as much as a surprise, but in the home, when you're doing field sales, you need to develop kind of a relationship with somebody. You know, you don't just want to be like the, the Joe or Ben insurance agent. You want to be Joe or Ben the person. And you want to kind of build that connection with them. It's extremely hard to do that over the phone. You know, you can do that. You can be friendly with somebody, but in the end, they're just talking into, a phone. They're not looking you in the eyes. You know, they know you're 500,000, 2,000 miles away. They know they're never going to see you in their life. So you kind of do have to morph your presentation around, kind of creating that, personality, through the phone, and not something where you can just like, reading body language was another thing for me. In the home, you could tell if somebody like wasn't interested, or you can tell if like you could get them to trust you. Building that relationship. On the phone, you only have a tone in the voice to work with and what they're saying. I'd say that was the hardest thing to kind of get accustomed to, is trusting, because if they don't trust you, they're not going to get an insurance policy with you. It's just as simple as that.
And can you share some of those? Because I remember some of the small changes you made over the past few months have really increased your production. I think it's interesting when you look at the numbers of a lot of people. It's all the same leads, and you'll have people, just the discrepancy is insane. Because in the field, you can kind of write some things off to, you're in one area, this person's in the other, number of leads. But when you're in this kind of environment, we're all drawing on, not me specifically, but all the agents are drawing off of the same lead supply. So what were some of the small, like, specific changes that you made that you think could be helpful for someone who's selling over the phone?
So the biggest thing, and this goes back to the trust, because, I was getting a lot of people to agree on a price. I was getting a lot of applications opened, but not finished, just because, it might not be people's first time getting insurance. Maybe they kind of trusted me, but kind of didn't. But would it get to the point where, they would have to give their, social security number or bank draft information, bank account routing number. And, they either said, I'm not doing that, or, in a lot of cases, they just hung up the phone there, and, you couldn't talk to them over again. They give you their name, address, date of birth, doctor's name, medications, all that. But when it comes down to that information, they don't want to give it to you. So what I did, I kind of crafted, a HIPAA disclosure and authorization to read to them, to where, like, my main purpose behind it was just making everything more official. Just making sure everything, I could do on my end for them to trust me was being done. And, I'd say before I started doing that, about 40% of the applications I started, I wasn't finishing, just because of, those two pieces of information. Once I started doing that, every application I opened, I was finishing about 90% of them.
If they had like the banking and everything else?
Like, if they had it. Yeah, if they don't have it, there's nothing you can do. If they don't have it in the home, you can try to, get them to call the bank, look harder. There's nothing you can do about that. But I'm talking about the people that have the information that just don't want to give it to you.
And what specifically was it? Wasn't it something off like the bottom of the Mutual of Omaha application? Where if an agent wants to find this disclosure, where could they look?
Yeah, so I just basically looked on the Mutual, because I just wrote in the field with a current client, a Mutual of Omaha children's policy. And I was just going over it, because a lot of HIPAA disclosures are like a page long, very confusing. If you read that, client's going to get bored. Client's going to not know what you're talking about. These disclosures were, literally 3 lines long, a couple sentences. And, it was just quick, do you authorize, first I asked them, are they familiar with the HIPAA authorization? And, a lot of them do know, because, being to the doctor, hospital, and I just re-explained. So, when you go to the hospital, it's, you sign it so you can release medical information to a doctor so they can treat you better. In this case, you're releasing that information to an insurance company just to make sure everything you've told me today is true and complete to the best of your knowledge. That's basically, affirming that, they are taking out an insurance policy. It's not like, some guy in, Russia trying to get their information and, pulling off a good American accent. And I don't want to say that, but that is the reality with some people. These senior citizens, they're trained nowadays to, not give information over the phone, and rightly so, because there is a lot of fraud out there. You just got to make sure that you're separating that fraud from, the reality and the legal, business.
I think that's a good point, that I think sometimes we get frustrated because we are legitimate, or those of us selling over the phone. And then when people don't give it to us, it's almost personal. But you have to remember that 9 out of 10 calls these people get, they really shouldn't be giving this stuff out. So we really do have the burden of proof is on the agent in this case, on our side, to prove that we're legitimate, because these people have every reason to believe they shouldn't. Everyone, their daughters and children probably tell them not to do it and all that. So I think it's an important thing to get over. And I would say with telesales, there's a lot of small changes you made. Is there anything else specifically that you think has been a factor in kind of your improvement over the past few months since starting in September?
I would say a big factor was just allocating my time in like the right places. So it'd be, situations like I would be spending too much time on a call that, I know 100% they're not going to buy. Especially like in the first 2 hours a day, we do tend to get a lot of calls. So, I kind of set up firewalls because I want my time to be worth it, so I'll ask them, I understand, you and my assistant were discussing the final expense plans. They sent you over to me, just get some help with discounts and pricing on your policy, and if they say, I guess so, well, I want to know, because it's a pretty clear question. I want them to know, what they are. So I'm saying, I'll just question them straight up. What did the "I guess so" necessarily mean? Sometimes they'll say, "Oh, well, I'm not really interested, but I guess I'll hear quotes if you want me to." Just stuff like that. Stuff like, "Oh, I just driving into work. I have, 30 seconds. I'm not really interested. I just picked up the phone. They transferred me." Just stuff like that. I don't want to waste my time with those people, because there's been 9 times out of 10 where I've gotten off those calls. 30 seconds later, I get a call in the queue where it's a person who adamantly needs it. Their husband died last week. They're going through that same process with the funeral. He didn't have any coverage. And I'm able to help them secure that money for the funeral. And I'd say on top of that, the last thing I want to go over in terms of, improving my sales is what they call backing up the hearse, which is generally speaking, it's providing that need, because a lot of people know what the need's for. And not a lot of people know final expense is to cover a funeral, but they don't really know. Maybe they've never specifically gone through it. So, I'll just mention, that they're trying to get this policy so that, God forbid, there's never a time in the future where their family, while they're mourning them at a funeral, is stressed and, sometimes fighting because they can't pay for the $10,000 price tag. And, somebody's going to have to sell their car. Somebody's going to have to work double hours to pay that off. And I want to put that image in their head. So, they really know that it's not because they want to get it. It's because they feel it's their duty to get it.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I think definitely some other positives is people are considering telesales, that being at home, being in an office, it's definitely, there's pros and cons to it. I think in general, the pros can outweigh the cons, but it's definitely work, just like field sales. It's not like you're just going to roll up on the phone and start making $30,000 a week. It's definitely work like anything else. And we're lucky enough to have been able to persist, through a lot of the difficulties, and we're still working out kinks. But, Ben's one of the higher level producers when he's on the phone. So that's, I think, some good information. Ben, is there anything else that you want to share with any agents out there that you might think would be helpful?
About telesales, I think I'm good. I think I'm good on that topic. Yeah.
As someone who is not an insurance agent and is very sensitive to fraud, I find that using something like the HIPAA disclosure, like describing what you're doing on the call and being very straightforward about you understanding the policies would help someone like me be way more receptive to a sales call. So I thought that was really interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. What I want to try to do, incorporating the HIPAA disclosure, it's to try to separate, because I'm trying to put in my mind, like, if they have been on a call like that where someone's trying to scam them, what would that guy have probably said? Yeah. I can bet you 100% of the time he's not going over HIPAA laws and HIPAA authorizations and me explaining how, you're basically giving the authorization to an insurance company to search your medical information. Like, I want them to understand that it's very transparent. Yes, that I'm reading them these things where I could just go ahead and say, okay, what's your social? I just want to, basically, fill the time, make sure, I'm not in a hurry, make sure, kind of that I'm giving the idea that I'm indifferent to whether they take this out or not.
If it's not a big deal to you, it's not going to be a big deal to them. It's something even in the field that I think was a big importance. And I can't emphasize enough, like when you look at the numbers, everyone's drawing off the same leads, and the disparities of what people like Ben do in terms of production and what others do is just tremendous. These little things can really be the difference between making consistently 1 to 2 to 3 sales a day and making, absolutely nothing. So it's really important, especially I would say even more so in the field, because the margin of error is less over the phone, that you pay attention to what people like Ben say, because the stuff does work. So yeah, Ben, we really appreciate you having us, having you on today. And our next episode, we're hopefully going to shoot for mid-January, and we hope to have another guest on at that time. So thanks, Ben. We really appreciate it.
No problem.